All right. All right. Next slide. It is important to note that both sex and gender are fully biological in nature, in that the brain is a biological organ, which we will talk about later, and that everything biological is on a spectrum between two extremes. This next diagram is called the genderbread person. It is used to help illustrate the complexity of gender. Gender is further broken down into several things. Identity is the mind of the person. Orientation is the heart or feelings. Sex is the physical biology. Expression is the outward appearance of the person. Sorry if this here feels like a 101. In 90% of people, chromosomes are aligned with their gender. For others, there is a hormonal and or brain chemistry divergence from the norm. The entire LGBTQ plus population accounts for about 9.3% of the total population. We will define these terms more completely later, but within this community, about 8.6% of the population identifies as gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual. Clearly the largest group in the community. About 1.3% identified as transgender. Out of the population, about 3 in 4 are male to female, and 1 in 4 is female to male. And there is a biological reason for that discrepancy. Actual numbers from medical sources state that about 0.02% are physically intersex at birth. The numbers don't add up because people can fit within multiple categories. It should be noted that 1.3% of the US population is 4.3 million people, making transgender population larger than the city of Los Angeles. Even though people identify as one category or another, gender orientation and sex are a matter of degree. The gender identity spectrum is woman to man with genderqueer in the middle. The gender expression spectrum is feminine to masculine with androgynous in the middle. The biological sex spectrum is female to male with intersex in the middle. And the sexual orientation spectrum is heterosexual to homosexual with bisexual in the middle. It is really more complicated than that, but these are the main categories. Gender roles, on the other hand, are imposed from the outside. Social constructs evolved over time since humans were hunter-gatherers. In the hunter-gatherer society of 10,000 years ago, a tribe would need to protect their breeding population as key to its survival. This was at the expense of males in particular, making them more expendable and allowing them to engage in riskier behavior. But with risk come rewards. Hence, gender roles were assigned as a matter of evolutionary survival. To kill off a rival tribe, attackers would kill off or abduct the woman of childbearing age, leaving the rest to fend for themselves. It's even in the Bible, Numbers 31:18. But all the women, children who have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. These roles are obsolete in the modern world, but are the precursors for many of the gender roles and expectations we see today. Enforcement of these standards was both by a combination of the influence of the powerful tribal chiefs, church, state monarchs, and governments, and by the psychology of dominance and codependence, societal pressure to conform, bullying, and the evolution of media and marketing. These roles vary greatly by culture and over time. The consequences for not conforming run the gamut from being socially ostracized to execution and everything in between. Gender roles are so deeply embedded in culture that even before a baby is born, the first question asked a pregnant woman is it a boy or a girl? Generally, people are not satisfied unless they get an answer. We even now have gender reveal parties. Why does it matter so much? It matters because it is not an innocuous question. The answer to it sets lifetime expectations of social status, behavior, dress, the toys they will play with, the careers they will follow, how they will be treated, and even how they are expected to respond to the same stimuli. It is one of those things that should not matter, yet it matters a great deal. Throughout history, gender roles have changed, but for centuries, it has been more acceptable for women to hug, sleep together, or go to the bathroom together without being thought of as abnormal in any way. Think about, why is it different for men? What is it about social class and power dynamics that did not afford men the same privilege? The theory around it is that men are thought of as superior in status to women. Hence, men who act like women are lowering themselves to the status of a woman, whereas women who act like men are trying to elevate themselves to the status of a man. This is the basis of what we now call the patriarchy. Please understand this is not assigning blame. It isn't anyone's fault. It is the way culture works. Historically, governance in the West for centuries has largely been a function of powerful men. That is why when gender roles are implemented and enforced, we call it the patriarchy. Men, this is not a criticism of you. It isn't your fault. You didn't ask for it. You are every bit as much affected by the patriarchy as women, but in different ways. To illustrate the patriarchy, men, when was the last time that you were allowed to cry or show the slightest bit of weakness in public and had to hold back tears or be stoic? Why is your success and failure in life determined by how much money you can make and not be how nurturing a father you can be? Women, why is it that what you do with your body can be dictated by an authority? Why is it believed that your value is determined by how fertile you appear or how attractive you are to men? Why is it believed that you are weak and emotional, making you unfit for leadership? Who was in power? Was it historically men or women who set us on this course? LGBTQIA plus people often do not fully conform to these roles and hence suffer the consequences imposed by the patriarchy. The alphabet soup is not because they refuse to conform, it is because they cannot conform. Here are the words associated with the letters. All of these categories are on a spectrum. So, for example, if someone is not exclusively gay, should they be classified under gay or bisexual or pansexual? If someone is male to female trans, but has always been attracted to women, does that make them transsexual or lesbian or both or neither? It's complicated because the categories are largely imposed upon us from the outside looking in. The way the brain works, it is satisfying to be able to classify things into pigeonholes, but many things defy classification. From the inside, the letters have meaning in the context of both raising awareness in heteronormative people and providing group cohesion, but they do little to identify a person as an individual. And what about heterosexual and cisgender people? Why aren't they included? While everyone is affected by societal norms, the alphabet soup is intended specifically to identify sexual orientations or identities that specifically do not conform with that which is heteronormative. As part of the majority, you may sometimes act in a non-conforming way, but you will likely suffer fewer consequences because of it. It's okay, though. Heterosexual people are also on the spectrum. There can be times when you may not conform. Girls may be climbing trees or playing with trucks. Boys may play with dolls or dress up as a princess. Or adults may reverse roles in the bedroom. All of this behavior is culturally derived. What is thought of as normative has changed throughout history, and change can be hard. This is a current photo of a cowboy and cowgirl costumes. Would it be acceptable for the girl to wear pants? Would it be acceptable for the boy to wear a skirt? Do we really know the boy is a boy? Do we really know the girls are girls? Child models often are employed either way using wigs and makeup. Why is it okay for girls to wear pants, but not for boys to wear skirts? For that matter, since when have cowgirls worn frilly skirts? They wore blue jeans. Yet this is the heteronormative identity we subject children to all the time. Sexual orientation refers to the attraction towards others. Orientation is a broad and diverse concept with various orientations reflecting different preferences for the genders to which an individual is attracted. Here are the most commonly recognized. You probably are familiar with heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual, but there is also pansexual, which is attraction to people regardless of their sex. This is often described as attraction to people based on their personality rather than gender. Asexual is a lack of sexual attraction to others. Asexual may still form emotional or romantic connections, but they do not experience sexual desire. Queer, a broad inclusive term that may refer to people who don't fit traditional categories of sexual orientation. It can describe a fluid or non-binary view of sexuality. These orientations can be fluid and may change over time. Additionally, sexual orientation is distinct from gender identity. Gender identity, on the other hand, refers to how individuals perceive and express themselves. It regards their own sexual orientation and the roles they feel aligned with. It encompasses the personal understanding of one's sexual and gender experiences. While sexual orientation is about whom one is attracted to, sexual identity involves a broader sense of self. Here's a summary of key sexual identities. Note that the labels are the same, but their meanings are different. You can't necessarily tell one's orientation or identity by who they're dating. So the best way to know is to ask, but only people who have a close relationship with you. This is a bit of a subtle concept, so here is an example. A man may feel an attraction to a male actor, but because he identifies as heterosexual, the thought of having sex with him will never surface. Non-sexual identity can be shaped by a range of factors, including personal experiences, cultural influences, and individual self-understanding. It can evolve over time as people explore and express who they truly are. These are examples of categories not particularly related to sex. Gender fluid, an identity for individuals whose gender expression and/or identity shift over time, often not adhering strictly to male or female roles. Non-binary, an identity that doesn't fit into traditional concepts of male or female. Non-binary people might identify with aspects of both genders, neither, or fall outside of these categories entirely. Two-spirit is a term used by some indigenous cultures in North America, referring to individuals who embody both masculine and feminine qualities or have a special cultural or spiritual role. Understanding and respecting each other's orientation and how they identify is key to fostering an inclusive and supportive environment. Something to remember here, none of this is new. Non-conforming people have been referenced in the historical record as early as the 23rd century BCE, almost as far back as the pyramids. Sumerian and Akkadian tablets from the second millennium BCE describe people who are neither male nor female, including eunuchs, women who couldn't have children, men who lived as women, intersex people, and gay people. Indian texts from 3,000 years ago document a third gender, which has been connected to the Hedras, who have formed a category of third gender or trans feminine. In ancient Rome, Gali priests worshiped the goddess of Cybele, castrated themselves, and dressed exclusively in women's clothing. Therefore, they have been identified by scholars as early transgender figures. And of course, this is just one example of same-sex relationships depicted on ancient pottery we're probably all familiar with. Same-sex male relationships were recorded in China dating back to at least 600 BCE. Same-sex couples are mentioned in poems, anecdotes, and histories with more frequency starting with the Han Dynasty in 202 BCE. Duke Ling and Mitzi Shah, pictured here, are a famous homosexual couple in China's history. We know about these myths and other ancient history through excavations such as this one pictured here, and scholars who studied and have written about these histories. Before Western contact, some Native American tribes had third gender people whose social roles varied from tribe to tribe. The term two-spirit was coined in 1990 to represent Indigenous American people's cultural recognition of non-binary identity through their own understanding of gender throughout history. Mesopotamian myths, which contain religious beliefs of the earliest human civilization, featured many references to individuals that were neither male nor female, or were not what we would know today to be cisgender. More recently, the Kama Sutra included references to eunuchs, intersex, and transgender people. This history remains despite attempts to erase this identity by the British colonization of India. Hedras are still present today and are legally recognized as a third gender by the Indian state. At left is a vintage image of a two-spirit couple. Gender expression is not necessarily transgender. This photo at right is of Jack Williams, otherwise known as Frances Clayton, who was a woman who served in the U.S. Civil War. There are other women throughout history who posed as men to serve in militaries and men who posed as women to get out of it. Some people may refer to this as cross-dressing, which does not necessarily make a person transgender or gay or lesbian, but does change their gender expression. There is much more you can learn in the books that you can borrow from the library. I set out on the table back here an example of some. All right.
I'm going to do the science part, considering I'm a scientist. So, I don't know. Okay, so, we're still doing stuff. I wonder how many of you remember eighth grade biology. In eighth grade biology, they taught us that there are 4 blood groups and RH factor. So we have A, AB, ABO, then RH. So everybody has 8 blood groups, right? Next slide, please. Well, not so much. There are 47 blood groups that are recognized. Now, if we give this to someone in 8th grade and say, these are the blood groups, nobody would ever pass biology. So the point here is that, just like in math, you have to learn arithmetic before you can learn algebra. In biology, the more you study it, the more complicated it gets. Next slide. Everything in biology is on a spectrum. You can't just say it's XX and XY and XX is female and XY is male and you're done. You can't do that because everything in biology is on a spectrum. So, if you say, for example, that sex is determined at conception, and the fetus is either XX or XY, then everyone in this room, everyone out there, and everybody online should have F on their driver's license because every fetus starts out as female. Some people say in jest, that every single male alive today is transgender. And there's some truth to that because of the way things work. So let me bear with me, I'm going to get all sciencey on you. But commonly, those fetuses with an XY chromosome respond to a surge of androgenic hormones, mostly testosterone, during the first 2 months of pregnancy and become male. It turns a female fetus into a male fetus. But those fetuses that have XX chromosomes, XX gives nature a whole lot more to work with, and they're insensitive to androgen, and so they stay the same. To a varying degree, about 1% of the time, this and other processes don't go as expected, and hence we have people with non-dimorphic sexual development. And read over these things. These are some of the medical conditions that can cause this. This is about half the list, and there'll be a test, so read fast. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a warning. These are going to be depictions of genitalia from infants who are intersex. So if you're a little bit unsure of that, maybe you could skip the next slide. As we discussed, some XY fetuses do not fully respond to androgen hormones and develop into a male is incomplete. So external genitalia is one thing, but there's also internal differences that we can see at the bottom of this chart as well. In the past, it may not be outwardly apparent that a child is intersex. It isn't always obvious just by examination of the genitalia. So in the past, newborns having ambiguous genitalia were assigned to sex shortly after birth. They were given what amounts to sexual reassignment surgery, and often done without consent or even knowledge of the parents. And this led to many cases of gender dysphoria, which I'll talk about later, because the choice made by the doctor happened to be wrong. There are also cases that even though they may be fully formed genitalia, the internal organs differ. There was a recent case where a woman who was by all outward appearances female could not conceive. Upon examination, it was determined that she had no uterus and had internal testes where the ovaries normally would be found. So today, the modern best practice is to wait This allows intersex individuals the opportunity to indicate the gender or not prior to sex assignment or not. It means perhaps performing gender affirming surgery at a young age without infancy, but the person may be completely satisfied living their life as an intersex person and nothing needs to be done. But it's their choice, not the doctor's choice. Sometimes this is still done, and the medical community is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore. So some conditions are not considered intersex, but just normal variability. Bearded ladies have a condition called hirsutism, which is caused by excess testosterone. As we'll see later, this often gets female athletes in trouble when they try to determine whether or not that someone in sports is male or female. We'll talk about that later. Next slide. We talked about intersex individuals who have biological characteristics that make them not easily discernible as 100% male or female. That's largely due to estrogen sensitivity or insensitivity during the first 2 months of pregnancy. We talked about the difference between gender and sex. The gender identity is largely psychological and interplays with societal gender roles. Next slide. People need to be treated and aligned with respect to their gender, not their sex. The mind is what's important here, not the DNA. The brain is biological, and given that the brain is a biological organ, does it not stand to reason that some similar process during pregnancy can make changes to the brain development to determine gender? The non-scientific answer to that is without question, yes, it does. Because 2 months, the fetal brain is not developed. There is no brain to affect. So it can't respond to hormonal stimuli. The flood of hormones remains and plays a role in the last half of pregnancy. Again, generally XX fetuses are insensitive and XY fetuses are, but sometimes they aren't. And so the brain develops into a male brain or a female brain, and there is a difference. Next slide, please. Scientific answer should be yes, but like anything in science, it's long-winded. So here's an abstract of an abstract. But it says our gender identity and sexual orientation should be programmed into our brain structure when we're still in the womb. Since sexual differentiation of the genitals takes place in the first 2 months of pregnancy and sexual differentiation of the brain starts in the second half of pregnancy, these two processes can be influenced independently, which may result in transgender. They go on to say there is no proof that social environment after birth has any effect whatsoever on gender identity or sexual orientation.
That's important.
Very important. This was a study done in a paper written in 2010. And if you
Social
want to read the
environment
entire
does not
abstract,
affect gender
I have it
identity.
here, but you probably don't want to. Next slide, please. So how does this next slide? How does this relate to gender dysphoria? Well, there are physical differences in the structures of the brains of males and females, which are programmed in during pregnancy. How this affects psychology is under dispute, but it's known by psychologists that it causes some amount of behavioral differences. Men's and women's brains work differently, but not better or worse in comparison. They're just different. Women have more gray matter, and men have structures that are larger. The DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Mental, mental disorders, defines gender dysphoria as a marked incongruence between one's experienced gender and natural gender and natal gender of at least 6 months in duration, and then goes on to define further specific criteria after that. But you don't need a diagnosis to understand that psychological distress can be debilitating in adults. It often lasts a lifetime. And this stress takes the form of generalized anxiety disorder and remains undiagnosed and is often masked by drugs. It can be treated by gender affirming care. Yes. In other words, it is nature. It is not nurture. LGBTQIA community is there because nature made them that way. There's nothing you can do as parents to cause a child to be homosexual, transsexual, or anything else, nor can you have them deprogrammed. What you can do, however, is cause severe psychological distress by denying or rejecting this fact. Interviews with many parents of gay or transgender children, the vast majority say they knew or suspected their child was different at a very young age. As discussed before, even among those intersex children surgically assigned sex at birth, it becomes apparent very early if the wrong choice is made, which is why the medical community now recommends delaying sexual assignment, if at all. So I said before that the MTF is about 75% of the transgender community and FTM is 25%. Well, that's explained since largely affected by the fetus becoming male at two different points in pregnancy. Explains the reason why 75% of transgender people are male, because male fetuses are converted from female fetuses. And if anything in the chemistry is off, the conversion is incomplete. Female fetuses generally stay the way they are, but may show some sensitivity to androgen, but to a much lesser extent, because of 2X chromosomes give nature a lot more to work with, and so it can be resistant to it. To put it more succinctly, not a choice, not a lifestyle, not a perversion, not a fetish, biological fact. There's nothing you can do as parents or anyone else to turn your child homosexual, transsexual, anything else, nor can you have them deprogrammed because nature made them that way. I'm stating that twice. But what you can do, however, is cause severe psychological distress by denying or rejecting this fact. The effects of denial are known by the medical community to increase the likelihood of psychological conditions like depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, psychological trauma. And I want to repeat that again. The effects of denial are known to increase the likelihood of these among young adults. Next. So according to studies by our friends at San Francisco State University, LGBT youths who experience rejection from their families are 8 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 6 times more likely to report a high levels of depression, 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs, 3 times more likely to be at high risk of HIV, and 4 times more likely to be rendered homeless. I'm not mincing words here because lives are at stake. Would you wish a child to be more likely to commit suicide or do any of these things? Do you think parents should disown their child or have their child choose to live on the street because they find living with their family to be unendurable? It's hard enough to be an adolescent. You, your family member or friend, may be your child's only advocate and support for this true. Not about you or your feelings or your politics or your opinions about it. It's about affirming who your child is and making it more likely that they will live to be an adult. Next slide. So as I've illustrated, human sexuality is complex interplay of natural biological processes. Gender is no more a choice than biological sex. It's not a decision to be made. And here's some quotes from real people just to get our heads out of the dark place we were just in. Trans people have existed since the dawn of time and will continue to exist whether you choose to recognize them or not. It's an anonymous quote. I couldn't find who said it, but it's a great quote, so I put it in. From Chaz Bono, the son of Bonnie and Cher and whatever. Son and Cher. There's a gender in the brain and gender in your body. For 99% of people, those things are alignment. For transgender people, they're mismatched. That's all it is. And our friend Emma Watson from Harry Potter, who's an activist now, says we all see gender as a spectrum instead of 2 sets of opposing ideals. And from Gina Rosero, who is a founder of Gender Proud and a TED speaker, all of us are put in boxes by our family, by our religion, by our society, our moments in history, even our own bodies. And so in the biological sciencey stuff, I hope that I didn't get too technical on it.
Now I'm going to start with the social issues. These are fears of the general public regarding transgender people. Keep in mind that transgender people represent 1 in 100 people. Transgender people are about 1% of the population, yet here is the status of anti-transgender legislation in this country. There seems to be an obvious disproportionate response to a group that is not large enough to politically defend itself. I am reminded of what it was like for the gay population in the 1970s, which was 10 times larger, and I cannot help but see history repeating itself. The U.S. has been designated a do not travel nation for foreign transgender citizens. You can see the map. We will leave it up to you to draw your own conclusions. The first issue is women's in sports. It is undeniable that men tend to be better at certain athletics than women, but not all. Men tend to be better at raw strength. Women tend to be better at endurance. There is a lot of overlap on the spectrum of athletic ability, so that is often difficult for athletic associations to come up with criteria to determine the sex of an athlete. Athletic associations have rules and guidelines that they follow. There is no test shown to be 100% accurate. Excuse me. Determining gender in sports is complex and has faced challenges due to the biological overlap in human bodies and the historical use of flawed testing methods, leading to unfair exclusions and ethical concerns. Suffice it to say, it is not easy to determine if an athlete is sufficiently male or female with respect to competition in gendered athletics. So, specifically, chromosome-based testing fails due to atypical and mixed genotypes. Hormone testing fails due to hypoandrogenism. Among women, one of the things that makes them better in certain athletics. There is a lack of scientific basis for gender verification. It is mostly guesswork. For example, South African female runner Caster Semenya faced scrutiny and eligibility challenges due to her naturally high testosterone level. She's not transgender. Gender verification procedures have resulted in substantial harm to some athletes, including psychological harm and unfair disqualification. Policies that focus on gender verification can lead to discrimination against intersex and transgender athletes who already face marginalization. The debate really revolves around the need to balance the integrity of women's sports with the rights and inclusion of all athletes. Over time, there has been a shift in thinking about gender verification, with some sports bodies abandoning mandatory testing in favor of more inclusive approaches. What about trans men? The question almost never asked is, should trans men be allowed to compete in women's sports? Wouldn't that be considered doping? How do you maintain logic and ethical consistency, given the irony of that situation? Do you think perhaps it is because the issue isn't really about women's sports? Kai Allums is the first openly transgender female-to-male NCAA athlete to play Division I sports. Of public perception and acceptance of trans people, he said, everyone's attitude towards trans people is not going to change overnight. And for some, they may never change. But I think as long as trans folks continue to be our true selves and fight for what we believe in, change will continue to happen, whether people are ready for it or not. Out of 500,000 college athletes, there are 10 who are transgender. Not all of those are trans women. So how much of a problem is an issue that affects so few people? British Journal of Sports Medicine found that transgender women who completed more than 1 year of hormone therapy performed worse than cisgender women. Male to female athletes lose more often than win. Since 2010, NCAA welcomes transgender athletes who have been fully 2 years into hormonal replacement therapy because their bodies have transformed enough to give them no significant advantage. Male to female athletes lose muscle mass, and their larger frames makes that a disadvantage. They don't win most of the time. The policy has been changed this year to exclude trans women due to pressure from the current administration. The International Olympic Committee released guidelines more than 2 years ago to support transgender participation, stating there should be no presumed advantage based on sex assigned at birth or sex characteristics. That's fine for professional and collegiate sports, but what about high and middle school athletics? That is a good question, and it will require a shift in thinking to eventually remove gender from athletics to allow all kids to participate. Some countries have adopted a third legal gender or dividing among skill and ability levels regardless of gender. Split people by categories, not gender. We already do this with wrestling. You don't put a 127-pound featherweight up against a 230-pound heavyweight. This is a completely solvable problem, says Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an astrophysicist and polymath, who is the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. The link above is a good summary, believe it or not, from Last Week Tonight by John Oliver. Y'all saw it? Yeah, it was good. If we have the political will, we can solve this problem. We cannot solve it by keeping things the way they are.
Now we get to the question that most people have a problem with. Gendered spaces. What you're looking at is a modern restroom. If you notice, floor-to-ceiling doors and individual spaces are a common sink area. This is the future of restrooms in the world. Not only that, but dressing rooms, locker rooms, and all the types of gendered spaces are likely to be reverted to this in the future with completely enclosed private areas. This is already becoming the norm in New York City because it has been illegal to prevent anyone from using any facility since the early 2000s. And during that time, there have been no recorded incidents of violence by trans women using women's facilities. And I want to repeat that. 0 incidents in New York City since early 2000s. Now, just a note about women's spaces for men who have never seen the inside of one. They're generally way more private than men's spaces, which makes it a bit easier for a trans woman to keep a low profile and be less noticed. I don't know for a fact, but I suspect it's not true for trans men. If you're pre-op trans men, in some cases, you may need to deal with the complete lack of privacy in men's facilities. For example, stalls with no doors, open showers, perhaps the inability to use a urinal without prosthetic devices. I don't know how you would dispose of feminine hygiene products. Next slide. Law depends on where you live. You're lucky. New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, DC, Delaware. It is by law, you are not allowed to discriminate. A person can use the facility that aligns with their gender as they perceive it. In other states like Virginia, they have policies about it, but they're not really enforced. Unless there's an incident or someone makes a big deal about it, they don't do anything about it. And now in other states like Florida, it's a criminal offense not to use the facility based on the sex that is assigned in your birth certificate. And not only that, the penalties can range from misdemeanor to child molestation if it happens to be a minor in that facility. And so I wonder, the situation's changing, this can change, but so far things are pretty good if you're in the Northeast and out West. But in Florida, I wonder how it's going to be enforced. I mean, a minute short, don't before we go into the bathroom. Seriously. And do we need to pack our kids' birth certificates when we go down there? I mean, I don't even know what a birth certificate is. I mean, maybe with my marriage license, I don't know where that is either. But nevertheless, that's the way things are. The next slide, please. It may surprise you, but all these states in yellow have no law about which restroom you need to use. The states, the darker the color, the more restrictive the law. Historically, it is only a social understanding as to which restroom is appropriate. It's never been law. This may be changing. Now remember, these laws that you see in these darker states are a result of a group of people less than 1%. In the case of male to female trans, 1 in 133 people. So notably Texas, I mean, who would think that Texas would have no law requiring to use a restroom as a, but they're not. And those that do have the laws, it's basically government facilities and schools. They can't, individual proprietors is up to the individual proprietor or private property owners to work together. Next slide. Now, this degree of discomfort is largely due to imbalanced power dynamics between men and women. You remember the patriarchy we talked about. I mean, the distribution of power heavily favors men. It makes women feel vulnerable. We understand that. And so we need to deal with this power dynamic somehow. Somehow. These bathroom bans are difficult to enforce. We've been living with trans people for centuries. We have probably shared the same public restroom with a trans person many times and never even knew it. And according to our friends at UCLA, there's no statistical link between trans inclusive policies and restroom safety for cis women. The same cannot be said for trans women. They're the most at risk for using women's facilities because the incidence of violence against them are 50% higher. I found no reliable data regarding violence against trans women, but we don't know. So for this reason, most trans women avoid using public facilities. But if you think about it, largely depends on how well a trans person presents. So it's usually the less skilled who get caught, whereas a person who's transitioned early in life is probably unclockable. Now, being clocked is a term used by the trans community to mean discovered, publicly outed, humiliated, and possibly physically assaulted. Now, it's not that cis women aren't at risk either, because on March 29th, 2025, this year, a 6-foot-tall cisgendered woman employee at Florida Walmart was using the restroom when a male customer, believing she was a man, barged in and banging on the stall door, threatened to beat him. She reported it to her management and was fired a week later because of security concerns. So, I'm focusing here on trans women because they seem to be the major point of enmity and concern. So, and plus I know more about it because I am a trans woman. But a man who dresses is not a trans woman. Think about how long it takes you to get ready in the morning. Maybe for men, jump out of bed, put some stuff on your armpits and pull on a t-shirt and move out in sneakers and you go out. How long does it take you to get ready if you have to go anywhere? How long it takes me to get ready? It takes me an hour to get ready. So let's work through the logic of a cis man wanting to masquerade as a woman for nefarious purposes. This is what you need to do. So who wants to come look like a woman, you got to play the part. You got to do better than me. He's got to pick out women's clothing and find some that fit. And since it now has no pockets, you'll need to get a purse. You go to the women's department to buy a bra. He doesn't know how to buy a bra, so he'll probably need help with the clerk. Let's see that it get when it fits. And then when he gets it, stuff it with something and find some heels and practice walking around in them. That's spraining his ankle, or maybe find some other uncomfortable pointy shoes he has to wear. Get that runway walk down. Practice balance. Accessorize some earrings and bracelets and jewelry, and maybe get his ears and navel pierced. Practice sitting with his legs together, which I'm telling you is not easy for a guy. You may need to learn to tuck. If you don't know what that is, look it up because I'm not going to tell you. Next slide, please. You're then going to have to acquire makeup and practice how to apply it. A bewildering task. You ever been, my guys, have you ever been in the makeup department at Walmart? There's like 5 rows of everything the same and 100,000 different shades of lipsticks. Nothing to shave his facial hair perhaps twice a day, or get laser electrolysis treatments, shave his legs and underarms, get a wax at the salon maybe if he feels up to it. And if he's already going to the salon, might as well schedule a full Brazilian, why not? He probably hasn't been painting his nails since he was 14, so he'll need to also get a mani-pedi and get his nails coated or dipped. Orange and red would be a nice choice. You need to purchase a wig, have it fitted and styled, and perhaps get voice lessons to feminize his voice. I'm still working on that. Change the modes of behavior and expression so he won't get clocked while hanging out with women. And then maybe, after all that time and effort, you might look in the mirror and say, I like that. And some woman may say, God, I like your makeup, or I like your outfit. And you'll get the affirmation that you never got those words. Okay. So the question is, and that's a long way to get here, why bother? Why in hell would he bother? If he's going to go through all that, he could just do it without any preparation at all. If he's really abusive, do you think assignments as women is going to keep him out? Certainly, he can keep out that guy at Walmart. It's really trans women who are the problem, or is it abusive men? And I would posit, trans women are not the problem here. There's no data to support it. It's abusive men who are all over the place, and it doesn't matter if he's dressed in a skirt. I want to tell you a little bit something from my heart. And I don't know the experience of trans men, but I think their sentiments are probably the same. So trans women are women. We respect women. We have made life sacrifices for them. We probably lost family members. We want to be a woman. We want to look like a woman. We want to act like a woman. We want to be treated like we are women. And we will go through a lot of time and effort to accomplish that. We may even be on hormone treatments or head surgery. It would be wholly uncharacteristic to carry over male aggressiveness into that mix. On the other hand, an abusive man in the dress does not look like a woman. He respects no one. He wants to abuse women and will use the least amount of effort to accomplish that, including even bothering to wear a dress in the first place. So I'll leave you with this question. Is it really trans women that politicians should be passing laws about? How is this protecting women? It certainly doesn't protect trans women. You've seen that. If they were serious about protecting women, they would fund programs and pass laws that actually protect women, but sadly they don't. So perhaps this whole thing is really not about the protection of women. So in summary, trans women are women. Their brain is female, their gender is female. They look, act, emulate, and feel like a woman. A trans woman is not subdued and dressed. Trans men are men. Their brain is male, their gender is male. They look, act, emulate, and feel like a man. And in all cases, some have transitioned early in life and have never known anything else. If you transition early enough, that's all you learn. For others, it takes work, dedication, sacrifice, and lifestyle changes to simply live. And gender dysphoria is not a choice, it's a natural consequence. I don't know if I missed the slide on gender dysphoria. I think I talked about that before. We talked about the gender dysphoria and what the definition was, and we talked about why it is what it is, and it's due to gestation and the flood of testosterone that comes about during pregnancy. Oh, and one thing out there, I know probably this group knows it, you can't blame the mother for that. It's nothing to do with the mother. It's like blaming her for a fetal heartbeat. It just happens. You can't go on a diet. You can't exercise. It doesn't matter what you do. It's going to happen 1% of the time. It's not going to work. So to review, there's no such thing as binary in biology. Everything is a spectrum. Here's a basic 4, but there are others. We know intersex people exist due to effects during gestation. Science believes transsexual people also exist for that reason. We don't fully understand the biology behind sexual orientation. However, science generally supports the LGBT community. The arguments against transsexual people are largely derived from misinformation and being blown out of proportion for political convenience. Transgender people in sports and gendered spaces is a solvable issue with minor changes to policies and infrastructure, given the political will to do so. And wrapping up, put a genderbread person here again. And we have opened up for questions and comments. That is the main part of our presentation. I hope that it was informative and you all enjoyed it. Okay. This is sources of good information I've looked at and I've read it. APA, of course, Mayo Clinic, American Bar Association, believe it or not, has some good links on law and transgender people. There's the LGBT Foundation, of course, PFLAG and Advocates for Transgender Equality. Go to the next slide, please. These are sources of misinformation. Do not trust anything from the American College of Media Officials. They are deliberately putting out misinformation. You know, I check that out myself. Do not believe anything they say. And also do not engage with trans exclusionary radical feminists and turfs or anything having to do with J.K. Rowling or a pseudonym Robert Galbraith. Disrespect it, because they will definitely point you at misinformation. And search transgender healthcare misinformation on Wikipedia for more information.